Gentlemen, the most effective gaslighting doesn't sound like manipulation. It sounds like reasonable conversation, valid emotional expression, or justified frustration with your behavior. When a woman uses these phrases, she's not having an honest disagreement or expressing legitimate concerns. She's systematically repositioning reality so that your valid observations become your personal failings. Her problematic behavior becomes your misunderstanding, and any attempt to address legitimate issues becomes evidence of your inadequacy as a partner rather than recognition of manipulation happening directly in front of you. Before we break down these phrases, hit subscribe and drop a comment if you've ever found yourself apologizing for bringing up legitimate concerns because somehow the conversation shifted until you became the problem. Your experience might help another man recognize verbal manipulation before he accepts responsibility for behavior that isn't his fault. Phrase 1. You're being too sensitive, emotional invalidation disguised as observation. This phrase appears when you express hurt, concern, or discomfort about her behavior, and instead of addressing what she did, she reframes your emotional response as the actual problem. You're not hurt because she did something hurtful. You're hurt because you're overly sensitive, too emotional, or unable to handle normal relationship dynamics. The phrase shifts focus from her actions to your reaction, making your emotional calibration the issue rather than the behavior that triggered your emotions. The manipulation works by positioning normal emotional responses as character flaws requiring correction. When you express legitimate hurt and she responds by labeling you as too sensitive, you're forced to defend your right to have feelings rather than discussing whether her behavior was appropriate. She's turned a conversation about her actions into a conversation about your emotional inadequacy, ensuring she never has to examine what she did because you're too busy questioning whether you're too sensitive to trust your own emotional responses. Notice whether this phrase appears specifically when you raise legitimate concerns about her behavior. Does she call you too sensitive when you express hurt about genuine mistreatment, but never when you're emotional about things that don't involve holding her accountable? Does the accusation of oversensitivity emerge strategically to dismiss specific complaints while she accepts your emotional responses in other contexts? If sensitivity accusations target only feelings about her problematic behavior, the phrase is tactical dismissal rather than honest assessment of your emotional patterns. The psychological hook makes you question your own emotional responses, because maybe you are being too sensitive, maybe you are overreacting, maybe the problem really is your inability to handle normal situations, rather than her behavior being genuinely hurtful. She's exploited your capacity for self-reflection by turning it against you, making you distrust your own emotional calibration so you stop bringing up concerns, rather than risk being labeled as too sensitive again. Phrase 2, I never said that. Reality denial through selective memory. This phrase emerges when you reference something she clearly said or did, and instead of acknowledging it or explaining her reasoning, she flatly denies the event ever occurred. You remember specific words she used, circumstances when she said them, and context that made them memorable, but she insists with complete confidence that the conversation never happened, those words were never spoken, or you're misremembering what actually occurred. Her absolute certainty makes you question your own memory of events you clearly recall. The manipulation works by making you doubt your own perception and memory of objective reality. When someone denies something you clearly remember with such conviction, your mind starts questioning whether your memory is reliable, whether you're confused about what happened, or whether you're somehow fabricating memories that feel absolutely real. She's not just denying a conversation, she's training you to distrust your own mind's record of events that actually occurred. Notice whether her memory failures follow convenient patterns that protect her from accountability. Does she remember conversations that make you look bad, but conveniently forget ones that expose her problematic behavior? Can she recall specific details about your mistakes, but has no memory of her own problematic statements? If her memory gaps specifically eliminate evidence of her wrongdoing while perfectly preserving evidence of yours, the forgetting is strategic rather than genuine memory limitation. The psychological hook makes you question your own sanity because memory feels unreliable and subjective, so when someone denies something with absolute confidence, your mind entertains the possibility that you're wrong even when you know you're right. She's weaponizing the fact that memory can be imperfect by denying perfect memories, making you doubt even your clearest recollections because she's willing to lie with complete conviction about objective facts. Phrase 3. You're just like your father, Act X, ass friend. Character assassination through association. This phrase appears when you're addressing her specific behavior, and instead of responding to your actual concern, she attacks your character by comparing you to someone you don't want to be like. She's not addressing what you said or whether your complaint is valid. She's associating you with someone whose traits you find problematic, making the conversation about your identity and character rather than the specific issue you raised that deserves discussion. The manipulation works by triggering your fear of becoming someone you don't respect or repeating patterns you've tried to avoid. When she compares you to your difficult father, your toxic ex, or your problematic friend, you immediately become defensive about that comparison rather than staying focused on the legitimate concern you raised. She's hijacked the conversation by attacking your identity, ensuring you're defending who you are rather than holding her accountable for what she did. Notice whether these comparisons emerge specifically when you're holding her accountable for problematic behavior. Does she compare you to negative figures, primarily when you're expressing legitimate concerns about her actions? Do these character associations appear as strategic deflection rather than genuine observation about troubling patterns in your behavior? If comparisons to negative figures reliably appear when you're addressing her behavior, the associations are tactical character assassination rather than honest concern about you developing problematic traits. The psychological hook makes you desperate to prove you're not like the person she's compared you to, which means you abandon your legitimate complaint to defend your character instead. She knows you fear becoming like your critical father or controlling ex, so she weaponizes that fear by making that comparison when you raise valid concerns, ensuring you're too busy proving you're different to maintain focus on the actual issue that triggered your complaint in the first place. Phrase 4. You always do this. Pattern invention to discredit specific instances. This phrase emerges when you raise a specific legitimate concern, and instead of addressing that particular issue, she reframes it as part of an established pattern of problematic behavior on your part. You brought up one specific thing she did wrong, but suddenly you're defending yourself against accusations that you always complain, always start fights, or always make her feel bad. She's transformed your specific valid concern into evidence of your chronic problematic behavior pattern. The manipulation works by making your specific complaint impossible to address because it's been recontextualized as just another instance of your ongoing behavioral problem. You came to discuss one thing she did, but now you're defending yourself against claims about your character, your patterns, and your consistent problematic behavior. She's turned your legitimate concern into evidence supporting her narrative about your flaws, rather than an issue requiring her accountability. Notice whether this pattern accusation reflects actual reality or appears strategically when she's being held accountable. Do you actually always complain, or does she claim you always complain specifically when your complaints are legitimate? Does she identify patterns in your behavior primarily when those patterns involve holding her accountable? If accusations of always doing this emerge specifically when you raise valid concerns, the pattern she's identifying is her deflection tactic rather than your actual behavioral pattern. The psychological hook makes you defend yourself against pattern accusations rather than maintaining focus on the specific issue you raised. You become invested in proving you don't always do this, which requires you to demonstrate all the times you didn't complain or didn't start fights, completely abandoning the specific legitimate concern that prompted this conversation. She's made defending your character more important than addressing her behavior. Phrase 5. You're overreacting. Minimization disguised as reality check. This phrase appears when you have a strong emotional response to her behavior, and instead of acknowledging that her actions prompted legitimate feelings, she characterizes your response as disproportionate to what actually occurred. You're not reacting appropriately to genuine mistreatment, you're overreacting to normal circumstances. The phrase positions your emotional intensity as the problem rather than her behavior that caused the intensity, making your reaction the issue requiring correction rather than her actions the issue requiring examination. The manipulation works by making you responsible for calibrating your emotional responses to match her assessment of situation severity rather than your own experience of harm. When you're upset about something genuinely upsetting and she tells you you're overreacting, you're forced to either defend the validity of your emotional intensity or accept her characterization that your feelings are disproportionate. Either way, the conversation becomes about your reaction rather than her action. Notice whether accusations of overreacting correlate with severity of her actual behavior. Does she claim you're overreacting to genuinely serious issues while accepting proportionate reactions to minor ones? Do overreaction accusations appear specifically when your strong response threatens to create consequences for her problematic behavior? If claims that you're overreacting emerge when your reaction is actually appropriate to genuine mistreatment, the minimization is tactical, rather than honest assessment of proportionality. The psychological hook makes you question whether your feelings match the objective severity of what occurred, which means you're focused on calibrating your emotional response rather than examining whether her behavior was acceptable. She's exploited your desire to be reasonable and proportionate by suggesting your feelings are unreasonable, making you responsible for emotional management rather than her responsible for behavior that prompted strong feelings in the first place.